Bridges Over Galactic Divides. Out of Many, 1. By Elton Gar. Zirax looked at the station and considered turning their shuttle back. That station, which the humans called the Lighthouse, looked like something put together by barely intelligent monkeys. That was because it was. The humans were barely out of the trees and had entered the galactic scene only 30 years ago, yet they were already making moves. The only reason they didn't turn back was because they had been assigned as ambassador, and as Zentari had no greater obligation than to work for the good of the entire Zentari alliance. There was a hiss as the airlock between their ship and the station connected, and they expected the air to vent. But they told themselves if humans couldn't even make a ship dock, they wouldn't be out here. Zirax stepped into the airlock that swayed under their weight and looked through the thick glass as the door behind them sealed. They saw a human and shuddered. It was average height, but that was about the limit of what was normal. They had elongated filaments growing directly from the skin's surface, forming a kind of flexible organic covering. Useful for a primitive species, but a race advanced enough to reach the stars would have better ways to regulate body temperature. That suggested that the variety of ways they shaped it was about personal vanity. This human's hair was down to its shoulders. The length indicated female, along with several other characteristics. As an ambassador, they needed to do their best to work with this species' peculiarities. That meant that gender was important for humans, as was the expression of that. Because of that, they had different words you used depending on if the person you were speaking to was male or female, and a third word if you were uncertain. The third, they, was closest to what their own people used. It was also able to refer to a singular or multiple people. That seemed correct since Zentari were expected to see the whole and the self as one entity as much as possible. Power and stability came from unity in mind and purpose. There was another hiss as the second door opened, reminding Zirax of just how unoptimized human designs were. Part of that was because of technological limitations, but a far bigger part was that they couldn't settle on a single design and focus on improving it. This station, like every human space station, was entirely different from the others. The human's face contorted as it saw Zirax, and it said,
"It's good to see you, Ambassador."
They almost asked what was wrong with her face, but they remembered their training. Because humans were so disunified, they needed to use facial expressions to tell others how they felt and what they were thinking. That seemed chaotic and problematic, but with some focus, they were able to work out that the twisting of her mouth and showing of teeth was a sign that she was happy. That seemed backward since baring teeth was usually a sign of aggression, but you couldn't apply logic to humans.
"I present myself as ambassador for the Zentari,"
Zirax said.
"It is an honor to have you, and we would like to formally thank your people. Many of the other species chose not to send us an ambassador. We hope your presence will help encourage some of the others as well. Your room is this way."
The station felt heavy as Zirax walked, and the walls were lined with odd images. They were far less precise than photos and of things that there was no need to have pictures of, like flowers or random people, and they were in ornate frames.
"Do you like our paintings? We have an artist in residence. He may paint your portrait if you're here long enough,"
the woman said. Zirax thought they understood and said,
"I can supply a photograph that will be a more accurate rendering. That will make it easier for those who need an image to recognize me."
The woman was silent for a moment and then said,
"It's not so people can recognize you. It's art. Painting a portrait of someone is a sign of respect."
Art as in self-expression. Yes. That was in the records, but I didn't fully understand it. You earn a sort of social status for creating these images, so it is easier for you to categorize the hierarchy of your society. I will have to decline. The Zentari do not believe in self-aggrandizement or hero worship.
It used to be more about that. But as we became a post-scarcity society, most of that fell away. Some people just enjoy doing it, and others enjoy their work.
I see. Perhaps it is just the concept of some that is bothersome then. Would your society not be less chaotic if you encouraged your individuals to think similarly to others, rather than expressing themselves like this?
Less chaotic, almost certainly. But humans cherish our individuality, and between you and me, we like a bit of chaos too.
Zirax wasn't sure what to say to that, so they remained silent for much of the trip. Their plan had always been to spend as much of their time here as possible studying and learning about humans, but it could be overwhelming. Then they reached their quarters. The quarters were 3 times as large as the standard quarters for one of their people. That might have bothered Zirax more if the humans hadn't gone to such effort to make them feel comfortable. The first thing they noticed was that the gravity was 20% lighter. That alone was a comfort that the humans hadn't needed to do. But it wasn't the only thing. They had imported a pod bed. He had been practicing sleeping in an exposed human bed because they hadn't expected humans to be able to, or even try, to get them a sleeping pod. As they examined it, they saw that it wasn't exactly the same as the ones made by their people. A good sleeping pod was made of some of the most advanced and durable materials in existence, with full life support and even some medical abilities. This looked impressively similar, but there were a few tiny details that were wrong. Mostly it was small adornments that were unnecessary and the lack of the pod's number. But they still felt more relaxed than they had since they arrived.
This is impressive craftsmanship. It seems beyond your normal capabilities,
Zirax said.
It was not easy, but we felt it's important for the ambassadors to be comfortable. We had one of our artists work to create the general look of the pod, and a team of engineers worked on making it as functional as possible. We also had one of our chefs make you some remic biscuits. He insisted on me telling you that the directions were to not add anything for flavoring, but he can give you spices or sauces if you wish.
There was a small storage area on the side of the pod where the biscuits were kept. With it, you could get them while in or out of the pod. Zirax had to admit that was a nice, if unnecessary, gesture. They could eat anything humans did, and with no other Zentari here, it wouldn't matter what they ate so long as it was nutritious. As an ambassador, they only said,
"Thank you."
We have someone available to decorate the room as well, but we're unable to find any records on traditional decorations in the official records.
The woman said. That the humans needed a different person for each job spoke to the flaws in their system. In Zentari society, one person could have done this since there were no choices.
My people do not decorate. To do so would be to differentiate one person from another, and that is bad for social cohesion.
The woman nodded, but it seemed clear that she didn't fully understand the value of unity. They were about to explain it when there was a beeping from her belt. She took a small device from her belt and said something loud and harsh that wasn't translated. She then said,
"I'm sorry. We had hoped for some more time, but the Kalyanish are insisting that we become part of their empire."
The Zentari have fought the Kalyanish twice in the last century. They are expansionist and their tactics are sound. Your people do not have the technology to resist them,
Zirax said.
That is remarkably close to what they said.
The woman said.
I will accompany you if you wish,
Zirax said.
It's not like we're going to keep the war secret. Perhaps you can see something the rest of us have missed,
the woman said. As she spoke, they realized that she was likely in a position of authority among her people. That was uncomfortable, because while there were members of their society, like Zirax themselves, who had authority, that was only to speed up the decision-making process, and they were always picked from the members of society who had done the best job of becoming similar to all others in their society. Walking through the station was chaos. Not because of the emergency. From what they could tell, most of the people didn't know about the potential war. It was simply the way of humans. 2 children ran down the hallway laughing, both of them dressed entirely differently and with different haircuts. One of them even had a ribbon tied into its hair. They then cut through what the woman called the mess. It was a large kitchen, far larger than should have been necessary. A single cook could make enough remic biscuits to feed a station like this, and since they were good for well over a week, there was no reason to sit and eat in the room. He dismissed most of that as people who weren't in command of the station being allowed to do as they wanted. It wasn't the Zentari way, but most races had less stringent uniformity among those outside of their military and command structures. Then they reached the command center. A Zentari command center was the wheel which the station revolved around and was staffed by those that were most perfectly unified in beliefs. Even the design enforced that, as it was perfectly round, with each station able to do any job. Upon entering the human command center, Zirax couldn't help but feel like he'd stepped into a battlefield of activity, a stark contrast to the Zentari's model of efficiency and uniformity. The center buzzed with a kind of organized disarray, each human engrossed in their specialized task, a notion quite foreign to Zirax. Commander Lee, the woman who had greeted Zirax, navigated this whirlwind of activity with a calm demeanor, guiding them through the maze of stations. Zirax observed as one officer pored over star charts with a focus that seemed to border on artistic passion, while another engaged in a lively debate with a colleague over communication frequencies, their gestures animated, their faces alive with the thrill of problem-solving. As Zirax stood there trying to make sense of the cacophony, a young officer approached Commander Lee with a report. The officer's uniform bore patches that Zirax assumed represented various achievements or specializations, a concept utterly alien to the Zentari, where individual distinction was deemed a threat to unity. Commander Lee listened intently, her face a canvas of concentration and concern. She then turned to Zirax, her eyes reflecting a determination that they found both admirable and puzzling.
Ambassador, how would your people face the Kalyanish if you were in our position?
Before Zirax could respond, their mind raced through the differences between their people and the humans. In Zentari society, unity and conformity were the bedrock. Everyone thought alike, acted alike, and any decision was reached through a collective process that ensured actions were harmonious and undivided. The thought of diverging from this path was inconceivable. Yet here they stood among humans, a species that thrived on individuality and chaos. They pondered how to bridge the gap between their worlds, how to translate the strength of the Zentari's unity into something that could resonate with the human spirit of diversity.
We, the Zentari, would first consolidate our forces, ensuring that all actions are harmoniously directed towards a single goal. Each individual's effort is a strand in a stronger rope, all pulling in the same direction. However,
Zirax paused, their gaze sweeping over the bustling command center.
I am not sure that would work for you.
They stepped closer to the command console, observing the flurry of activity with a new appreciation.
Perhaps the key is not for you to become more like us, but to embrace your chaos with a unifying objective. Coordinate your varied talents towards a common goal, without stifling the individual creativity that fuels your advancements.
Commander Lee nodded thoughtfully.
So, unity in purpose, not necessarily in method.
Zirax smiled slightly. A gesture they had learned was appreciated among humans.
There are those of us who have questioned how humans have advanced so quickly. Your technology is inferior, but it is more varied. If we find something that works, we continue to do that. Sometimes that allows us to advance quickly thanks to the focus. Other times we miss better ways of doing things. It also makes you impossible to predict. My people always attack the same way. The Kalyanish are the same. But chaos is a weapon. Each unique perspective could provide the solution to a problem that uniformity might never uncover. The Kalyanish expect to fight a unified front, but perhaps it is a front of diverse yet unified challenges they are not prepared for.
Commander Lee's expression softened into a grin, the kind Zirax had learned to associate with human optimism.
Thank you, Ambassador. You are of course right. But I must ask if that is true for humanity. Might a bit more diversity in your people be helpful as well?
Zirax understood as she spoke that she knew the Zentari's great secret. She understood that while the Zentari were unified, they were not the whole of their people. There had been splits, and the biggest was the Kalyanish. The Kalyanish were as unified as the Zentari. But over the last 100 years, the conflict between the 2 points had made them act as entirely different cultures.
You invited my people to send an ambassador because you wanted to convince us to fight a war for you.
Zirax said they wanted to be upset at the humans for that, but it was logical.
We invited members of every subsection of your species that we know of. We also invited members of 100 other races. We believe in the strength of a multitude of ideas. My first officer sees the world in a very different way than me. And as long as he's respectful, it makes us stronger. We would welcome your help, but we would prefer it if you could help us prevent the war.
There are a few differences between the Zentari and the Kalyanish. But the one most relevant to you is that the Kalyanish believe that unity should be forced on other races. We believe that given time, you and the other chaotic races will learn the value of unity.
We're not going to be given that time if the Kalyanish take over. But even if you don't care about that, if you allow them to take over territory and species, they'll be more powerful the next time you get in a war with them.
You are correct that you have created an efficient trap to start a war between my people. But you suggest an alliance, and that is not possible. We do not ally with those who are different from us. We value social cohesion.
So you see no value in our way, yet you understand that it could help us in the war.
Commander Lee said.
You do not understand my people. It may indeed be time for us to create a new offshoot. One that tests diversity. But that will not help you in your war.
Zirax said.
Why would it not help?
A voluntary rethinking would be a few thousand people at most. That is how we test our society. It is how the Kalyanish were formed. The time allows them to develop and test things over the 1,000 years it will take for them to become powerful.
Then how many of the Zentari would fight the Kalyanish?
You still do not understand unity. We will fight because I will suggest it, and our cohesion means none will disagree. They trust me because I am like them. And that same unity will be in the war. All Zentari will fight in the war or support the war.
I had hoped to convince you more fully, but I had expected more time.
Commander Lee said.
You have done an admirable job of convincing me. When the new species is created, I may have to join it to avoid contaminating the Zentari.
Not bad for a day, I suppose. And the Kalyanish will have a surprise waiting for them. Would you be willing to take the weapons station? I think your unique perspective on the Kalyanish would be valuable.
So long as you do not continue to insult me.
Zirax said, but they thought perhaps being a bit unique might not be as bad as they had been taught. Author's note.
I try to be fair to all perspectives in my stories, especially the ones I disagree with. There is very little less effective than badly portraying someone's beliefs and then saying that it is wrong. I think that most people reading this will agree with and understand which side I fall on in this particular discussion, but I also think I was able to express the complexity. There is a great deal of value in unity, and while I don't believe there can be too much diversity, there certainly can be too much division. How do we find that balance? I wish I had a better answer, but I think that it's simply talking, and more importantly, listening and trying to believe people when they tell you something you don't fully understand. I try to do that in all my stories. If you'd like to follow more carefully, you can subscribe to my newsletter at www.ansci-fi.com. Just look for the link that says Free Book. Or if you'd like to help, you can join my Patreon at patreon.com/Elton and get access to over 25 patron-exclusive stories and weekly polls for what story I write next. Thank you. Elton Gar.